Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Point of No Return podcast. On today's show, we spoke with Ralph Van Coillie, Managing Director of Ecommerce at Ubisoft. Ralph invited me to the offices of Ubisoft in Milan, and we had a great talk. We were sitting out in an open space, looking over the mountain in a very beautiful office. So you can hear a bit of background noise of the entire team hard at work at Ubisoft. A bit on Ralph himself. Ralph's passionate about e-commerce, digital, and really large-scale change in organizations. He's had a lot of different roles in banking, media, telecom, and retail. He strives to help empower organizations, individuals, and communities to help deliver digital competitive added values by leveraging data, operational excellence, technology integration, and people management. He's also recognized as a keynote speaker, advisor, and board member. Like I said, we sat at their offices in Milan where we spoke about e-commerce, career, gaming. We had a great conversation about his past in e-commerce, where he's had multiple roles in the sector, what it takes for organizations to succeed and to go direct to consumer, the KPIs that he watches every day, where Ubisoft is on their current journey in going direct to the customer, some of the new trends, of course, AR, VR, and esports, and then talking about the role of ethics in digital and e-com. Ralph is a rare senior executive with very deep e-commerce expertise. He generously shared a lot of his insights from his long tenure in e-commerce, and I think that you'll learn a lot from the conversation.
Ralph, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm really happy to be here. It's actually my first time visiting the Ubisoft offices, so I have to say I'm pretty impressed, and I feel like a bit like a kid in a candy store.
That's
looking at all the video games. I guess my first question is, how did you find your way to Ubisoft?
So basically, I fell in love in the video game as many people in the world. So when I used to work for Mega Bloks, which is a toy company, during 5 years, I was in charge of the e-commerce there, and basically I used to develop a bunch of online games and to basically digitalize the physical games, the physical toys games, basically online. So basically, the kids was able to play or to continue or to extend their physical experience to the digital world. And basically, I just fall in love because I developed almost 14 online massive multiplayer online games. So basically, I discovered this famous world on the statistical point of view, first of all, where basically you have finally a way to communicate with your target audience. Because as a manufacturer of toys, basically, which is plastic mainly, you have a choice to finally the way to communicate with your consumer, truly. Because the way it works on the manufacturing point is you have to communicate and basically develop your product and sell your product to example, major distributors such as Walmart, Toys R Us, and so on. So you haven't the chance to discuss directly with your consumer, which is the kids. And you have a lot of regulations to follow in order to communicate with the kids itself. So it's quite complex to have this connection. So basically, I fall in love with this medium, which was the first time where we were able to communicate directly with the consumer standpoint and basically get some meaningful insight and basically feed the design department, the manufacturing department, what should be the next best toy, or how the consumer react and play with their toy by itself. So it was the first basically interaction with them. So I really fall in love with this concept, and I would like to pursue this adventure somehow in this industry. So I finally get a position on Ubisoft, and pretty proud to be here.
I feel also just looking at and following your career that the type of problem you want to solve is always related around e-commerce, around digital.
Exactly.
And going directly to consumers. So I'd love to unpack that a little bit and get feedback from someone that's been in the space for a while.
So basically, a lot of companies are working on the B2B side. So they try to develop a bunch of solutions. They try to resell those solutions to a B2B channel, which the way to sell on B2B is quite different versus the B2C. So to sell your product to mom and dad is totally different to sell your product to Walmart, Toys R Us, or Amazon, and so on. So I think the commercialization strategy is very different, and the culture, the expertise, and the way to analyze is way more detailed on the consumer standpoint than the B2B. With all the respect to the B2B itself, but it's quite different. So I think I used to have a lot of pleasures basically to develop and expand this culture and this mindset and its expertise, obviously, on the B2C channel, because I think it's quite meaningful to finally have this communication and to manage over 1 million sometimes communication in the meantime, because you have to manage sometimes a user base of 5 million user or 2 millions, whatever number would be, is way more than the B2B, right? On B2B, you might have up to 20, 50, 100, basically big players, versus on consumer standpoint, you have to exceed at least 1 million. So it becomes unmanageable for a guy is to talk to 1 million people in the same time. So it's why the analytics becomes critical. If you don't like analytics, then you won't be able to deploy your one-on-one strategy and basically develop your one-on-one communication with each of those consumers. So I think.
So that's very interesting. And just maybe to dive into a little bit, like, do you see a future where the B2B, B2C lines, let's say, are blurred in the sense that everyone can just, add anything to a cart, let's say, and purchase directly from a supplier, from a manufacturer directly? How do you think about that? Obviously, having been in this juxtaposition of a business versus a consumer.
You always have this major disconnect on B2B versus B2C, because if you initiate your company as a B2B, then you become basically an expert in this field, and you develop your strong relationship with your vendors. And the day after, you start to develop your own channel, so you become like in competition with your primary channel. So it's quite delicate sometimes, and there's always a major conflicts on the top managements to basically push this new B2C channel, because they know exactly that they will make more money, but they would be against their vendors, basically. So they steal the money, and they kind to not steal, but they try to eat the lunch of those B2B channel, right? So you have to be very delicate the way you handle this channel. It becomes a political commercialized issue.
Yeah. Channel conflict is not an easy one, right?
Exactly. So probably on the culture standpoint, it's quite complex to handle this type of issue, because it's always dedicated to give 100% of the energy to develop this new B2C channel, because they know de facto that this will be an impact. This will impact this B2B channel. So the relationship that they have been developed sometimes for 20 years, they will be disturbed with this new native, you can say, and probably logical way to do business with B2C. Everybody agree about this channel, but when you deploy it, it becomes quite meaningful and very impactful for those B2B, because they know exactly, those guys start their own business against us.
It's in your career, you've obviously built a lot of e-commerce businesses.
Yeah.
What do you think is the challenge for a company that doesn't have that DNA, that's not a pure play, let's say, right? That hasn't started off as an e-commerce player. Yeah. What do you think is the biggest challenge for them to actually have success?
I think it's the only way to do this or to initiate this and deploy these new channels is it's a building block approach. So you don't have this. If you want to start basically and develop this whole thing in one step, it won't work. So I think it's undigestible for the company and even for your partnership. So you have to find the sweet spot and the right way to grow, and it's a building block approach. So it's a step by step. You have to initiate your first sales. Example at Megablocks was a good example. So we initiate this whole thing with the online games. So it was not a true sales approach. We just developed, initiate the relationship with the consumer, and basically when we got over 10 million tractions of users. So over 10 millions of online gamers played to our game. So it was quite significant amount of people. And at this point, it was a good timing to initiate our direct sales, because the momentum was enough to basically legitimate and get some significant result on the B2C channel in terms of sales through. So I think we have to each company has to draft those milestones basically, and those milestones need to be significant in order to justify the following step. And I think it becomes a case by case, and this is what I like to do is to define those famous thresholds. Yeah. And this is where the science comes to the play. Is what is the threshold for this given company? I don't know. So let's figure out, and let's have open discussion.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's almost like a way of having specific, let's say, financial thresholds that will prove to the management, prove to the shareholders that, hey, this thing's working, and then maybe we should continue investing because you can understand it's the way of the future.
The financial aspects is always the easiest, to be honest. I think the probably complex part would be the IT and all the operational aspect, because the minute you start to sell on B2C, On the warehouse, it's totally different. Instead to send the pallets to Walmart, then you have to open your pallets and manage the item within the pallet. And guess what? If Jeanette is not satisfied from this item, guess what? It will return the items on the warehouse. So this concept of return is not even a component that exists on this B2B channel. So it's quite complex to manage those redeem or remaining items on the warehouse. And when you're going to do after a year, it's a bunch of remaining items, and it becomes quite complex. And all the ERP system is not compliant with this item level. So they manage on the pallet side. So it's totally different mindset in terms of ops and IT, and obviously expertise. The warehouse is not set up to pick and pack single item. They are managed to select a bunch of pallets and feed a truck to a given date for every quarter. So now we have to manage on a daily basis 3,000 orders. Okay, it's totally different mindset, totally different warehousing management. And even on an e-commerce side, and you have to manage a checkout process. You have to manage the consumer services, the returning the complaints from consumer standpoint. When you have 20 customers, for example, Walmart, Toys R Us, it's quite easiest to manage the consumer services versus when you have 2 million consumer who complains, and 5% of those will be complaints about the product. So how you have to set up a new department, you have to set up a new tools to track those complaints and see why they are complaining, and you have to feed the manufacturing. So you disturb the manufacturing processes, you disturb the consumer services, the ops, the marketing staff are not adapt for this new mindset, because those guys sells probably a TV program for Walmart because they justify this product with a $2 million campaign to justify this whole channel. But guess what? The day after, you have to open your search engine marketing. What's this? They are not even aware about this new channel. Let's say you have to buy keywords. What's keywords? What's the ads on Facebook? When you work with Walmart, you're not even aware about those components. So even the marketing team is not compliant or probably experiment for this new way to market those products. So it's a global education process and mechanism. So on the marketing, on ops, on finance, obviously, because the way to track those sales is totally different too. They have a lot of returns on the item level, so they are not experiment to track those and basically understand this new financial flow. The notion of pre-orders versus resale versus returns, fraud detections, all those components doesn't exist on the B2B, or quite limited, because the fraud detection is not a component that exists on the B2B channel. So the day after, you have to manage the fraud detection on their system, which is not compatible with this notion of a multi-transactions component. So all those aspects, you impact everybody on finance, ops, IT, marketing, consumer services. So it's a pretty significant project. So you have to find the right spot, the right basically roadmap, and it has to be digestible internally and need to be meaningful for the consumer standpoint. So what is the right balance? I don't know. So let's sit down and draw the plan.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. I like how you position how all the different departments have to work together. It's like an orchestra, right? Like they all have to work in the same. You obviously as a director, a senior executive in e-commerce, what is the 1, 2, 3 metrics that you like to look at on a regular basis to understand the health of the business?
Depending on your maturity level of your organization, for sure, everybody will say, the conversion rate is definitely the key matrix, is the sales funnel. So how many people enter into your store, and how many people get out with the product on hands. So this is the conversion rate, which is probably obviously the critical basically KPI for let's say any maturity level. But if you start your business, I think the KPI would be different versus if you initiate this B2C channel. I think the KPI would be quite different. Would be the culture, would be the threshold. Example at MegaBlocks, I like to present this notion because it was fairly. I just initiated this B2C at MegaBlocks, so the first threshold was the traction and the momentum, and probably the added value that we were able to extract from those for this new kind of communication channel, this new medium, and it has to be meaningful enough to justify the following steps. Because the following step is you need to invest in your infrastructure, in new people, in new expertise, which is quite expensive. So you have to make sure that the top management is on board with this vision. And the only way to make this adoption rate very high, which is the first KPI, is the adoption rate, let's say, it would be to convince them about this major investment, and this investment is not a one-shot deal. It's a long-term. It's a probably 5 years window at least. So they have to be fully convinced about this channel, and the only way to convince them is you need to find the meaningful KPI to start this whole thing. And as a second point is the conversion rate. And when you become quite mature, like major player, which is it's now part of the DNA, let's say, I think the following KPI would be the engagement rate. So what is the engagement or the adoption rate of your B2C channel on the consumer standpoint? So how many times they purchase, how many times they come to the site, basically how many times they share their product to the broader audience, how many times they reviewed your product in a positive way. So it's quite different than the conversion rate. I think the conversion rate becomes a consequence of those best practices. Mm-hmm. So I think depending on your maturity level, I would say you have to start with your adoption rate KPIs. The second step which is very medium maturity level would be the conversion rate. And the last mile would be obviously all the engagement rate, adoption rate, and all those KPIs related that will justify and demonstrate those engagement rate, which is the amount of review, the amount of purchase they made, the amount of time they shared the good news, and so on. So all the positive sensitivity of your product.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to be selfish now and ask you a personal question. What I struggle with our customers is educating them around customer lifetime value.
Yep.
And it seems today still a hard concept for them to kind of like wrap up their heads around. They're still very focused on, let's say, sales per square foot in a retail environment, or in-session conversion rate, which is still good. But I like personally LTV. I think it's the one of the most important metrics because it helps to guide your immediate decisions. Right? How much should you spend to acquire a customer? How do you explain that to your teams?
So first, I'm totally agree with you that the consumer lifetime value is one of the key way to justify ultimately the value of this channel. But it's pretty complex to do at the first stage, let's say. If you start your B2C channel, I think it's really too early to discuss about this component. And even on the medium size you don't have enough sometimes probably a track record to basically calculate and be very meaningful in terms of lifetime value because you don't have the mechanisms to retain them and engage them. So the lifetime value, I think, is definitely for the last stage, which is the most mature organization. And I think the only way to calculate something accurate is you have to start about all the data management, and you need to be very mature the way you manage your data in order to be consistent the way you track your lifetime value. Because the problem with this calculation is everybody has their own matrix and own way to calculate this component. And guess what? If you make different result on the same questions, then you start to basically minimize your credibility on this component and say, okay, those guys don't know what they are talking about. So I think prior to release this new matrix, you have to make sure that you define clearly what is this, how to calculate this KPI. And it seems to be simple, but what is a customer versus when we consider a sales? You have to answer those questions prior to calculate, and becomes a true corporate, basically, KPI. And I think it sounds easy, but in fact, on the play yard, it's quite complex to come up with a consistent, let's say, lifetime value calculation. Yeah,
no, that's good feedback. Yeah, but like you said, it's not easy, and I've been struggling with it. And I'd love to maybe dive into your current role at Ubisoft. You've been here for 6 months. Yeah. What are your current priorities? Obviously, it's a massive company that has a huge global footprint. What are you responsible for exactly?
So basically, I'm the head of the e-commerce, try to basically commercialize as much as I can the finished goods, which is the merchandise, and the video game itself, even the physical video games, across the digital channel, across our direct channel. So basically, Ubisoft has developed this own dedicated channel across NCSA, which is North and Central and South America. And so basically, the main challenge is obviously the velocity. So how can we accelerate this whole pace and make sure we are sync with the B2B strategy? The second challenge is, again, the culture. We have to make sure we grow up this B2C culture, as discussed and explained previously. So another challenge is they have big players out there. So I think we have to see clearly Steam's a major player who basically took over this marketplace with pretty decent and perceived value and value proposition. I think they made a great job. We have to respect that. And I think we're pretty close to them too. So you can see all the Ubisoft product on Steam. So I think now is how basically we manage this partnership, which is close to be a competitor, sometimes a partnership. So this is the beauty with this new economy is the boundary are quite vague and gray now. We are a day a competitor and the day after we're partners. So this is the beauty with this new economy. So it's quite challenging to find sometime the right balance in this partnership. And but so far it's pretty good. So so this is another major not major challenge, let's say, is to find and basically track this this partnership evolution.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on, let's say, like frenemies, like let's say distributing on Amazon and other online sites?
We used to we have a partnership with Amazon on the B2B channel and the B2C channel, so we work on the both sides with them. So Amazon is definitely a key players out there that you can't miss for sure. So we used to work with all the major digital players. So I think we are open to as today. I think we have to be open on this new economic model. And today the boundary doesn't exist. This is the beauty of the web. I think the minute you go out there, the minute you speak English, then somebody in Netherlands might read your website. So you have to be compliant with those guys. So
yeah.
I think today is the only way to segment and localize your website. It will be by languages and by currency. This is the two trigger to basically probably give some highlights that this is, hey guys, you are in Australia because this is a currency in Australia and the language is in English. So because you have these two variables, you can understand that you are in this location. Otherwise, it's quite complex to see where you are on the website. So today, I think the globalization is quite just eliminate those boundaries, and you can observe the same behavior on the partnership level, on the distribution level, on any level. I think this is the complex part of this job is to make sure you define somehow your limitation and your localization. You need to talk to the Spanish guy in the US in a proper manner. Is different than the guys in Spain, even though the same language. So it's this syndication process is quite complex. Let's say.
Is that your biggest challenge? Like maybe to dive into like what are your biggest things that you have to overcome?
My biggest challenge is probably to connect all those systems together and reconcile those data in order to create a meaningful and powerful engagement program. I think this is the biggest challenge. Is we have to make sure our system are basically connect enough and meaningful enough to demonstrate what we are looking for in order to develop respectful and meaningful communication with our consumer. Because it's not true that we have to sell for a product. The goal is not to sell. The goal is to communicate with them. And the only way to communicate with each of them is you have to make sure your algorithm can basically detect and automate and simulate those potential one-on-one communication. This is the biggest challenge from my point of view. Yeah. Because this is where we stand. I think we are close to the maturity level where we need to gather this information. And this is my day-to-day job today is try to develop this engagement program and try to find the right respectful and ethicful too, because it needs to be ethic. And sometimes the limit is undefined, let's say, and it's not the same for everyone. So what is the right ethic limitation? And probably sales potential, obviously, because we're in a commercial way, to draw the line on the consumer level. So this is quite challenging.
Have you started exploring what new business models might come out of this? I can imagine that in your role, you can find ways to generate, let's say, new product lines that generate higher margins, et cetera, without maybe like, giving away the secret sauce. But how much of this is in your current day to day? So
I'm a big fan of the blockchain. So let's say I'm looking for a new business model around blockchain. So I read a lot and we experiment some secret project, let's say.
Okay, good.
So yes, we're quite active. So I'm very eager on new technology that can really make the difference for at least 1 or 2 years. To give some added value or to create basically a unique selling proposition for at least 1 or 2 years, and I think blockchain is definitely on the critical path, and obviously all the not say basic but the common basically technology around engagement and automation. So it's definitely something where we dig a lot on this technology field.
So you're not really necessarily interested in, let's say, the future of AR or VR in gaming per se, because that doesn't fall under you, but you're more interested in a go-to-market of using, let's say, blockchain, using some kind of automation, right? Is that a current assessment? Or?
Yes and no. I think for sure the VR is part of the DNA of the company. So VR, we already released a bunch of games on VR. So I will let those guys do their job. I think they made a great job on the studio side, which is develop the games for a given, can say, player audience. So I think those guys made a great job. So, and my goal is to make sure we commercialize and present this value of the right customer audience. But I think ultimately, as we speak, I think on the gaming industry, and I think on every e-commerce, you have to converge all your, can say, channel in one location for one given consumer. So on consumer standpoint, let's say you are in a VR, you have experimented a game on a VR. How can you basically purchase directly on your VR apps and instead to go on a website or on other apps? So the goal is to converge all those, can say, experience in one place for one given consumer. So this consumer like to have everything on VR. Okay, let's bring all those bells and whistles on this channel. But probably another one might say, you know what, I think I really like the mobile games because I don't have time to play on VR and this gives me a lot of headaches. Okay, fine. So I prefer the mobile game. So how can we converge all the e-commerce in this channel? And you need to be meaningful and very high-end basically experience on this channel. So how can you syndicate your e-commerce total and global experience on those specific channels? Today is VR. Tomorrow would be blockchain. The day after would be in-store. Probably with would be hologram. I don't know. Why not? So we don't know where the consumer wants to purchase, but for sure we have to be ready to bring this value prop in this specific channel. So how can you basically accommodate and basically converge this consumer experience and this e-commerce experience to this specific location? So it becomes, you need to be agile enough to and develop your stack of technology and your commercialization tactics and strategy on those specific niche of channel.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I like how you guys are looking at it. Like, let the consumer decide, and then we'll basically be there, right? Versus trying to force a technology down their throat.
Yeah, I think if you're still on this mindset to force basically a sale, I think this is old school in 80s and probably 50s. So it's quite old, and you won't succeed for sure.
Well, it kind of happened with the news this week with Microsoft Connect, right? Like that they're shutting it down, and I find that one of the reasons that the PS4, has sold twice as many consoles, was because they tried to bundle the Connect, right, with the Xbox, and thus forcing a higher price point. And then, people had to pay an extra $150 for an Xbox versus a PS4, and PS4 was pretty smart. They're saying, hey, we're going to go all in and be the gaming console. And, it's, I think, an example of what you're saying of, trying to force a technology that maybe people weren't ready for. Do you guys look at VR, AR differently? Like in the sense of, are you betting more on one or the other, or is it still too nascent?
I think, every company try to find their, own basically, technology adoption channel, and probably first you need to find the audience. If the audience is not enough, then okay, guess what? It's not an opportunity. It's just a pure technology buzz. So I know it's trendy to talk about VR, but is it the consumer? Are they ready to purchase those items and probably be ready to experiment and play 20 hours a week on a VR? I don't know. It's personally, I've tried and it's given me a headache after 2 minutes. So even it's cool, but personally, it's not everybody will be compliant with this new technology. But guess what? It might be 10 to 20%. I don't know the ratio would be, but there might be enough audience to justify and legitimate this commercialization strategy. And I think honestly, the consumer is the king. So if they decide it's not ready, that's it. It's not ready. So that for me, it becomes a deal breaker. And
this might be a random question, but do you guys look at esports at all?
We're just not looking at. We're making a lot of money and making a lot of traction on esport with Rainbow Six Siege. If you have
that's great. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I'm
awesome.
so not an expert. Just looking at it, it seems very interesting. Like people, stadiums full of people watching people play video games. I'm like, that's pretty interesting. So that's why I was curious. So,
esport in Canada, I think we're the first the first game in Canada. So I think Rainbow Six just succeeded in this new field, and esports is definitely a key market trend on the video game space. And I think this reflects a lot of consumer directions. They want to play together. They want to compete against us. We remove all the boundary. people from Korea, they can compete against Brazilian guys and so on. So they have a new community-driven, can say experimentation. So the e-commerce need to follow those trends. So you have to be there. So how can we sponsor a team? So the e-commerce have to adapt this new needs, because now we want to sponsor a Japanese team. So how can your e-commerce can facilitate those sponsorship? How can you basically sell new technology to become a better competitor against those Japanese team? I don't just give you an example. So can you offer a new graphic card? Can you offer a new bandwidth services to be more powerful? Can you offer a new screen, a new resolution screen with a high definition screen to see all the detail and make sure you are more competitive and basically more precise on your actions? So this is the type of thing that you need to be aware in order to offer the right product mix that those guys needs. So this is the beauty of this new market trend is, and the e-commerce will be transformed. Instead to sell finished good, then we have to sell tickets for those e-sport events. So you see, this is a good example of how you need to be flexible on your platform in order to change your product mix to another one, because the market change. And I think this is one of the challenges. How can you basically develop a stack of technology and marketing strategy to be compliant with this new market trend?
Yeah. What's the framework that you use when you come up? Let's say you're like, we want to go after a new market, or we want to do e-commerce and esports, like you said. Is there a framework, or like let's say like a decision matrix that you say, okay, I'm going to sit down and like, this is what I need to accomplish, right? From a strategic point of view, how do you think about it from that perspective?
So we won't change the classic management rule, which is first is make a right state of the nation and see, okay, what is the actual situation? And guess what? This state of the nation will evolve. So you have to redo this exercise on a X basis, depending of your aggressivity and the growth of your industry. On the gaming industry, it's quite fast. So I think a state of the nation have to be done at least on a yearly basis. And starting from there, you have to draft the SWOT, which is the strength, weaknesses, opportunity, and threat. I think depending of this state of the nation, you have to find what should be the opportunity for us, what should be the threat, and what is our strength, where are we good at. And you have to capitalize on those strengths, obviously, and make sure your weaknesses is not a showstopper for those opportunities. So this sounds pretty classical, but this is key, and you won't change the business management rules. And starting from there, then it becomes a strategy. Okay, according to those opportunity and threat and market trends. So what should be the best strategy to capitalize and make the most value of it? And this will basically reflect a new value prop that should be meaningful according to your reading and so on. And then it becomes a go-to-market strategy. How fast can you deploy this new value prop? And this becomes an agile and very operational tactics on the ground at the company level. And how fast and basically agile can you deploy these new tactics? And can you switch from your strategy of a year one to strategy to year two? So sometimes you need to be agile enough to switch your direction directly because the market change.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm obviously a little bit biased when you use the words agile. I think it's definitely the way to approach it, right?
Yeah,
the world moves a bit too quickly today to stay on a 3-year plan, for instance.
Yeah.
Maybe a more challenging question is, what do you think is happening in the industry right now that no one is really talking about, that there isn't this buzz about, but you think is important?
I think all the ethics around the marketing is, I think, people are getting better. All the companies getting better to track people and collect data and basically remarket those. I think we will reach a limits that will basically will make some violation of the ethics of people, and people will start to yell. So I think we will basically reach a consumer tolerance very quickly. I think because people is getting better, and it's not only one company. It becomes probably a major crowd of company will be very better and stronger on the marketing and targeting audience. So I'm a bit scared on the ethics. So what happened if people start to say stop? So okay, so what should be the day after? I don't know, because now you build during 10 years your marketing strategy to be agile, to be consumer centric, and the day after they say stop. I don't want to hear any more about you. Wow. Okay, what should be the next the next step for those marketing guys and all the stack and all the operation and all those people are finally compliant with this strategy. So I think this is a major topics that I'm looking for, and it's not really publicized, let's say, on the internet by itself. So I think this for me it's a real concern. Yeah. So what should be the next step if people say stop?
Yeah, I have to say I tend to agree. There's a bit more talk about regulation amongst the big technology companies and all the things that they're doing in tracking. I don't think people realize the extent that the type of information your phone is sending every single second, right? And we're seeing it right in the US right now, like backlash against like Facebook specifically with the elections and everything. Yeah. It's pretty scary.
It's starting, and I think the beauty with the web is it's starting. Everything is exponential. So I think probably in 2 years, probably no more than 3 years, I think we'll see a major clash and major basically use case to say, well, okay, on this case we really exceeded the marketing there, and I think it becomes like a use case that everybody will remember and say, okay, you know what? How your company would be now? You have to reposition your company according to this new fact. So. It would be now a new green company, but green in terms of marketing, I don't know. It would be a new, we are consumer compliance. I don't know. It would be a new way to say that we are legitimate to communicate with you in a proper manner. I don't know. So I think we have to be ready for this major clash, because when the problem will be spread out, it would be how fast can you react to this new basically reality. And I think the sexual harassment that we're seeing today is pretty a good example of how fast, basically, and how impactful one case can basically becomes exponential in terms of communication flow first and impact. You see how many people resign and basically get some lawsuits against those guys, and wow, it's quite impressive to see how those major guy was basically indestructible, and suddenly becomes totally destroyed. So I think, and we'll see the same behavior on companies. So those guys will basically exceed the limits, and they will have probably to shut down. So the day after, so one day they will be the king, and the day after might be a zero. So because they were not ready for those major clash.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's pretty good insights. Respectful of your time, Ralph, maybe one last question. What are you excited about the most? Like in terms of your day-to-day, be it a technology or a new business shift?
I'm probably very passionate about delta. Delta means starting from point A versus point B. So how basically can we generate a major delta versus? So I'm sounds weird, sounds a weird addiction, but delta for me is what's the difference versus where we are today and where we are going to, and have we basically delivered what we expected? So basically starting from point A to point B, what is the difference? And if the difference is huge, and I'm very excited about those huge, basically growth or variation or whatever it would be. So it could be on motivation aspect, on KPI. So how can we improve, example, the motivation of your staff from 50% to 75%? So those major delta would really basically excite me. So every major delta will just excite me on a daily basis. So it sounds pretty neat.
That's really interesting. I think I could ask you like a million questions on just that insight, but that's actually really interesting. Ralph, thanks for your time. Maybe one last question is where can people find out more about you or about Ubisoft?
So basically, Ubisoft.com is definitely the key destination that you should go, and probably on LinkedIn is probably my channel. I'm not using Facebook because again, I think we're too far on the privacy. And so I will invite you to go on my LinkedIn profile.
Great. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.